All right, so session 4. Like I said earlier, we are going to separate this section into kind of half and half. So half will be presentation if I don't run over, which I might. And the other half will be the big Q&A session. So we really hope you guys feel like you can engage with us during that time, throw those questions out there at us. If not, we'll leave early. Shouldn't tease them with that one.
Yeah, tease that and there'll be no question.
Hey, I'm ready to take it now. You got me? All right. So, so that's the plan for this session. At the end, we'll have our closing remarks with our benevolent Renee Gledhill Early. And that will be the end of things. Just so you know, to reiterate from the email that you guys received about a week ago, we will be sending out emails to everyone who registered, whether it was to attend in person or not. And if you included your email address, if you were not registered before today and signed up on that sheet, you will also get the emails. So you're going to get emails tomorrow. One email. It's going to have helpful links for you, and all the places we directed you to. And then in the next week or so, we do have July 4th holiday coming up, so it might be after that. Don't know, can't tell you, won't be here. You guys will also then receive an email that tells you where you can find the recordings and where you can find the slide decks, and they will also include our speaker notes and everything like that. We have had a request to please create a glossary of terms that includes all the acronyms, so we will do that for you. But yeah, so all that's coming up. Okay, so session 4. Real quick, I'm going to go through agreements, Section 106 agreements, and what that looks like in North Carolina, give you guys a couple of examples of our most common types, and then actual examples of what we do with them. And then I will also be going over a couple more topics, and then it will go over to OSA for their data extravaganza. All right, so Section 106 agreements are outlined, the possibilities are outlined in 36 CFR 800 course, and you can find agreements that fall under the program alternative category in 814. And those include programmatic agreements. Sometimes you'll hear the term prototype programmatic agreement. It's also right there. Exempted categories, standard treatments, program comments, which are also very common, and alternate procedures. There are some really great trainings that the ACHP puts on that really goes into depth on all of those types of things and how often they're used. A lot of that stuff is at a much larger federal level, so you won't necessarily see us here at the state level engaging in developing one of those types of agreements or alternatives. So we typically stick with the programmatic agreement there. 36 CFR 800.6 for the resolution of adverse effects. That process allows us to enter into what we call memorandum of agreement. And that is a really helpful way for us to lay out all of the details that are needed for resolving an adverse effect, who the players are, who has responsibilities, all the good stuff. All right, so those are the two most common in North Carolina, programmatic agreements and memorandum of agreements. From here on out, I'm gonna call them PAs and MOAs, if y'all don't mind. The PAs, they have a much larger scale usually. They address multiple actions across wide time frames, and oftentimes effects to historic properties aren't known at time of execution. Sometimes they are, but not always. And they can also be used to resolve adverse effects. And as an example, I've got on here the infrastructure reset strategies that a lot of our military installations periodically will have to go through will result in adverse effects, but they are over time. They have to kind of be phased. They have all these big plans. There's a lot going on. And so sometimes you will see programmatic agreements for those that are in a direct response to an adverse effect. But we also use programmatic agreements to streamline processes. So the example I've got here is the process of administering community development block grant funds from HUD. So HUD will have what they call responsible entities, right? So they are giving another entity the obligation, they're delegating their responsibility to perform environmental review and Section 106 review, because that entity is, they meet the requirements for a certified local government, and they can have the staff to do it. They can show that they can meet all of these requirements for reporting and record keeping and all that stuff. And so they can, instead of going through the state, they can themselves administer these CDBG funds to their municipalities, their constituents. And a way to help them keep that process moving a little faster is we will enter into a programmatic agreement that gives them a process for doing the 106 review for certain projects on their own, as long as they have qualified staff or they hire a consultant to do it for them. So that way they don't have to send us each and every project, right? And so currently we are working on a programmatic agreement for this process with the city of Charlotte. They have not had one in decades, right, Renee? And so since we have had a kind of like smaller waiver with them expire, we have seen, you know, a couple, maybe 100, if not more, projects from them. And so you can see where the sheer number of projects that they issue these funds to, they benefit from this streamlined process. Their constituents benefit from the streamlined process. And so all of those roles, responsibilities, everything's laid out so that we can trust that they are doing what they need to be doing. And then if something gets wild, if there's an adverse effect or they have any questions, that's when we take a look at things. And then in this one in particular, there's also going to be phased surveying. So we're going to make sure that the city knows where their historic properties are. Now, Charlotte gets surveyed a lot, but they do have some little pockets here and there that, you know, could use a good look. So we're going to have them do that, and they're going to work through these processes and review their projects, and hopefully, you know, we won't have to mess with anything for a couple of years. Memorandum of agreement, that's a much more narrow focus. Those are usually in response to a specific adverse effect and one specific action, or maybe a couple of actions in there. Every now and again, they can be used to outline complex responsibilities that are needed in order to avoid an adverse effect. So again, typically, if a federal applicant, you need a core permit, is going to adversely affect a historic property, we say, the Corps says, okay, well, the only way we can give you that permit is if we resolve that. We're going to do a memorandum of agreement to make sure everybody knows what needs to be done, going for it. But every now and again, if the work it takes to avoid that adverse effect is complicated enough, you can also use an MOA to help you establish that avoidance process. All right, so the basics of any agreement really is outlining who the parties are. You know, I've got some examples up here. It can be really anybody. It can be a very small group, so maybe just the applicant, the federal agency, and the SHPO. Or it could be tribes, or it could be local interested parties, maybe individual constituents have a vested interest and they have requested to be a concurring party, or we have nonprofit organizations and historic preservation commissions who have vested interest in our historic properties, so they also either get invited or request to be a part of these agreements. So those are all the parties, and we make sure that the agreement very clearly outlines who those people and groups are. It also outlines what the federal undertaking is. You know, we're not going to have a Section 106 situation without a federal undertaking, so you got to be clear about that. What is the consideration for historic properties? So how do we know that we're affecting one? Where does that information come from? How did we get there? And then it will also include stipulations that are the terms of the agreement and also administrative type things. So how often do you have to report on this agreement? How long does the agreement last? And then what are those mitigation strategies? And then very clearly it will tell you who has to do what, because there's nothing worse than 4 years into a project, somebody goes, but I wasn't supposed to do that. And you read the language and you go, oof. Yeah, it doesn't read like anybody's supposed to do that. That's not great. You know what I mean? So we really try to make sure that not only are these documents very clear on timelines, responsibilities, deliverables, but also we want them to be able to be read by members of the public, because how else are they going to provide us with comment, which is a really big part of the resolution process, is giving them the opportunity to say, I see that you're doing this action. I understand what you've given me that you're saying you're going to do to resolve it. Here's my comment on that. And they need to be able to understand. So a lot of this language is legal jargon. There's just no getting around it. But we try to make it the least painful as possible. Again, the ACHP has guidance on their webpage. I've got a couple links on here for just introduction to Section 106, if you're not beefed up on that. And then they also have really good agreement guidance that includes templates, checklists, the execution guidance. So if anybody ever says, well, I don't know if I need to be an invited signatory or a concurring party, what does that mean? They spell it out for you in ways that are so easy to understand. And so it's very helpful to be able to know that for yourself, but then also be able to point your clients in the direction of those resources. They have got free webinars that are, they could take a quick look at stuff, but then they also have, in-depth multi-day sessions that we highly recommend everyone at least does the free stuff, just because, again, they put it together in a way that it allows you to synthesize the information and be able to share it with others. And that's really a goal of ours, is to make sure that not only are we doing the process, but we're helping other people to understand the process and what it takes, and that they feel confident in their ability to understand what's going on. Because there's nothing worse than it's that way because I said so. All right, so programmatic agreements and memorandums of agreement. The two, the numbers on them change. A PA is a big thing again. So those numbers per year tend to be lower. And the duration for those can vary every now and again, but usually it's 5. The ACHP recommends 5 years. But every now and again we'll have one maybe for 10. It just depends on what needs to happen in the length of that time, what is going on with the project. Deliverables may or may not include phase surveys like we talked about. Abbreviated consultation, so that's something that's in our FEMA PA. That allows us to work through a resolution process pretty quickly and without having to go through everything to get an MOA done, which can significantly delay the project. And then there's also that language that says, well, if you can't use that process, here's what you do for the MOA. The MOAs, we knock those out pretty regularly. We have a lot of projects, especially in areas that are developing with neighborhoods, residential developments and things like that. We're seeing a lot of that, and especially our rural agricultural resources, those are the ones that are getting blasted out. Typically, we stick to the 5-year duration on those. We do not want those to exceed that, just because it's harder to keep everybody on track. If you got to keep track of something for 5 years versus 10, it's much easier. In those, you can expect mitigation deliverables every time, over time. You have to keep track of all that. We have an insane agreement tracker that one day hopefully will not be as painful, but right now it is the only way we can do stuff, and so we are. It's got about 600 and something lines on it, which is a nightmare. All right, resolution and mitigation. Appropriate strategies, how do we get there? What do we consider? Obviously, the significance of the property, we have to look at what we are impacting and what is that level of significance? Is it local? Is it state? Is it national? How many people see this as a significant property? And what can we do that will be of public benefit? So, typically, and we'll go through a couple of strategies, but, a lot of context development or other surveys so people know what's going on. We've changed it up a little bit lately, trying to get more digital with it so that folks can actually engage with things on their phone because that's what they're on all day, every day. So we want to get there with that. What are the needs? What are the local needs? So I don't know what a little town out west might need. They know, and so that's why we ask them. That's why we need public input. It's what's very important because they can tell us what they might need as far as preserving their cultural traditions. Do they need an oral history day? Do they need a story map to tell their story? And then what can we do for future historic preservation? If we couldn't save a house this time, can we have a donation that goes to an entity that will help us save a house next time, right? So just trying to gauge what the best way to have a preservation forward impact long term is one of the things that we think about. And then, of course, cost. Most federal agencies will not allow us to require mitigation that is what they deem to be unreasonable. And at any point in time, an applicant can say in our consultation, I believe this is unreasonable. I do not want to do this. The cost is too high. And that federal agency has to make a determination on that. And so we do our best to make sure that we provide enough information when we are going over deliverable options that the applicant can take that scope of work, real quick and dirty scope of work, to multiple consultants and get an estimate. We always recommend 3 estimates so that way they can see kind of a range, or availability or, whatever's going on. Because we know that right now there's not a lot of availability for you guys. Y'all are all working on a lot of projects right now. And so when somebody comes to you and says, well, I just need this thing over here done, and you're like, we don't have time for that. That also impacts what we can ask them to do, right? So if they can't get somebody to do the work, it's harder for us to ask for it to be done. But yeah, so keeping that in mind, we don't use dollar amounts as a baseline for whether or not, we're not like, this is a $100,000 mitigation project for sure. No, that's not what we're doing. We're not saying you can give us that much money and it's all good. What we are considering, though, is it outrageous? Are we asking you to do something that is not commiserate to the level of the impact, like I mentioned earlier? And then on the left, right, my right, I have an example of a story map that was developed for a dam removal project. It's very cool. It will be one of the links that you guys get eventually. And I encourage everybody to go check it out. They did a really great job putting that together, but they also had to do a context survey in order to fill out information on this. All right, standard treatment measures, documentation, recording properties, all that good stuff. Public interpretation, that's where story maps and signage and pamphlets and things like that come in. Oral histories, self-explanatory. Georeferencing historic materials, so finding maps or imagery, right? And getting those into a system that can be used on various platforms digitally to help tell those stories. Context surveys or inventories. So maybe we have a historic district that's kind of an older nomination and it doesn't exactly tell you each and every address within there and tell you whether or not it's contributing or not contributing. That's not helpful. We want to be helpful. That is a lack, and so we can fill that need, right? So we can make that happen. Sometimes we just need to get something listed, period, right? And so a nomination is an option. And then additional archaeology, or what they call data recovery, right, is also an option. We do love an alternative strategy, though. So we encourage the applicants, the consultants, the local folks. You tell us, you got an idea, we don't care how crazy it sounds, throw it at us, because it might be the thing that is the most appropriate. This is an example of a project that required an MOA. It was actually a project that came down through the FEMA PA. So it's hazard mitigation grant funds used to purchase, buy out, and demolish properties within Seven Springs, which also happens to be the Seven Springs Historic District, the green boundary there. And what that meant was by the time they were finished with the whole thing, there were multiple properties. It was going to make it so that the district is no longer viable. It's no longer eligible for listing. It was not a listed district. It was on the state study list. And so the action, so here we got, the property, the action, who are the parties? So these are the 4 parties to that MOA. And then the treatment measures and responsibilities. We went out and did some documentation. We took photographs, keyed those to site, floor plans and stuff. We did an oral history day. So they hired a consultant to do an oral history day. Folks brought in their stories and their photos. They scanned those, recorded them. And then all that information was used to populate a story map that is now publicly available online. It is housed underneath our umbrella, and we will control that in perpetuity. And it also has a share your stories feature. So there's a form where folks who were not able to make it out to oral history day, because a lot of people don't live there anymore, or maybe they passed away and their kids don't know about it because they don't live there. Eventually, maybe they happen upon the story map. They can share those stories with us, and then we will regularly check to make sure that if something has been uploaded to us, if it fits with the story, and by that I mean if it tells the story of Seven Springs. I don't want somebody telling me about Goldsboro. I don't need that. This is not what this story map is. And I don't know if this works for y'all. Maybe not. But this QR code will take you there. But it's not a static map. It can be updated, and it can be built out to continuously tell the story of a town that had kind of it's kind of crazy. I learned a lot more about Seven Springs than I ever wanted to know, honestly. But there's a lot of cool stuff going on in there. I encourage y'all to check that one out too. All right. My last little bit before OSA is the executive orders and Section 106. And I know that we were all pretty interested in that one. I've got stuff to tell you. I don't know if it's going to satisfy you. So just be ready. So throughout all the presidencies, the ACHP has historically provided guidance on presidentially issued executive orders. This is not their first time. And you can go to this link that I've got up here, and it will give you a couple of examples of when they have provided guidance for the same thing. It also talks about a lot of legislation, how all those mechanisms work with 106 and all that kind of cool stuff. So I would highly recommend checking that out. What is different this time in some of the cases, and I did not list every EO that might affect a 106 review in this. There would have been too many. I kind of focused on the emergency, energy emergency one for y'all. But just know that generally speaking, the guidance we have gotten carries across all the EOs, not just this one, okay? So what's different this time, especially for the energy emergency, is that the executive order states that the emergency is the length of the presidency. So that is a very long time. Usually emergency declarations, especially those under the Stafford Act, so think disasters and FEMA and that kind of thing, they have a very specific window that is in almost 30-day increments and can be extended, but typically does not go 4 years, okay? So that's how this one is much different. We have to think about this in the long run, and we have to think about how the potential for back and forth to happen in that time is real. We just have to know that we are doing our best at meeting what we know to be our Section 106 responsibilities and helping others to meet those responsibilities, but that we also adhere to the guidance to the best of our ability. So and then also just know that for all of these EOs, the federal agencies are making the determinations. They get to say that their project fits under that declaration. If we object to that, we can, but we have to send that way up the chain. It becomes a big thing. But we basically get correspondence from an agency, and they get to tell us what's going on. And we have to respond to that. And so for EO 14156, the energy emergency, the ACHP has advised the agencies, the federal agencies, to use any applicable currently executed agreements they may have with their SHPO offices for 106 that include emergency language. Not all programmatic agreements will have emergency language. It's kind of wild to tailor it. So it's recommended to have it in all of them. It's just not always there, right? And so say, the FCC might have an agreement with us. That's a bad example, but we're going to roll with it. They might have an agreement with us, and it has that emergency language. They can use that for their projects if it's related to energy, and they say it is. Okay. If there is not an existing agreement in place that they can kind of use, they can use the emergency provisions for 800.12b2. Right, and that's real fun. Get in there and take a look at that. Trust me. So they have two options. If they send in a review request to a SHPO or a TIPO or anybody else, they say, we are doing this under this EO, and we are using either this process or we're using 800.12. You have 7 days to look at this. And in that, they can also tell us 30 days, but really if they're using the EO, most of the time we're seeing 7. And in that, we do need to respond within 7 days. It is very burdensome. We have to drop everything we're doing, even the disaster stuff, to make sure that we respond in 7 days. Even if it's just to say, this is crazy, this doesn't fit. Because some SHPOs have had to say that. We are seeing projects that agencies are considering adjacent to the EO, and so they are categorizing them under the EO. It's not a direct emergency, energy emergency, like something you would think about. It's not mineral extraction or even transmission line installation, what have you. It can be, this road carries trucks that take, materials for that thing, and that's an energy thing. And so that road's now an EO project. It's kind of wild out there. We, as a group, the state historic preservation offices across the country have been meeting fairly regularly and talking about some of the struggles and what it means and how many projects they're seeing, and just trying to get a good sense of how everybody is handling the things that are coming in and how they're responding when they really and truly object to somebody saying this is an EO situation. And so we do have some idea of how to move forward with projects that are problematic, but in the long run, all we can do right now is just make sure that we as an agency are doing our best to respond timely, and to make sure that we are recording all of our documentation in the right way, so that if something happens and we can really work things out later, we have everything we need to get there, versus just not being able to respond, period, and saying, well, we're not going to do that. No. We are working hard on that, trying to get there. So if you have additional questions about that, again, I would very much encourage you to check out the ACHP's website. They are doing what they can to provide guidance on this, but you have to remember they are also a federal entity. They're up there. They're, like I said, it's what they can do. But yeah, we are happy to answer any additional questions. If you need to reach out to the environmental review inbox and ask questions about that at any time regarding a project that you may be part of, please do, and we will get to that. All right, so that's me. Session 4. OSA data management and access. We've got Dylan and Sam.
All right, thanks everybody for sticking around here to the bitter end. I'm Sam Franklin. I'm the Office of State Archaeology GIS specialist. I'm going to talk about OSA's data management and access. Before you get too excited, it's no big groundbreaking announcements, more explanations and I don't know, maybe some hope for the future. All right, so I'll start out with what have we done since 2017, and pick 2017 because that was the last time I think that we met for one of these workshops. But since then, we've made some improvements to our in-person background research process. We've scanned a lot. Thank you, COVID-19. These efforts during that time have led to around 90% of reports getting scanned. This includes oversized maps, addendums, appendices. Additionally, we've scanned about 60% of our site forms. And both of these things, reports and forms, are now available for in-person background research. When you come in, you have access to all of these, and they're very well organized now and readily available. We built custom GIS tools to hopefully simplify the process in ArcMap and folks' experience with it. These tools let researchers bring in their own shapefile or draw something on the spot or drop a point for their projects. Then the tool selects and exports the sites and surveyed areas that are in GIS. You can save it onto your USB or the desktop and email it to yourself. It also creates an Excel table that will list out the site numbers and report or bib numbers that you can then use to kind of go through our file folders and pull the forms and reports and track down any occasional ER numbers you might need. We've also worked with DIT and our department IT and to replace each kiosk twice since 2017. So that includes 2 in Raleigh and 1 in the Western office. Granted, these new kiosks come with new issues. They've also been pretty big improvements, especially in the hardware. Looking back at 2017 kiosks, I think they had about 2 gigs of RAM. That means, I think that's the minimum for running older versions of ArcMap. So I think it struggled with that just alone. We've also digitized a lot of our legacy archaeological sites in GIS. And we add new ones as they come in when they're requested. And you heard from Wesley about that. Legacy surveyed areas were also digitized for much of the western counties and urban areas across the state, while new survey projects get mapped during the environmental review process by the OSA reviewers. We also continue to update attribute fields for these data sets and any of our other data sets that we manage that eventually you're able to access and have during your background research process. So that's some of the stuff you might see when you come in person. There's some other things that we've done that you may not see that has been touched on a little bit here, but I'm going to go into more explicitly. So we've streamlined some environmental review processes in OSA. And from the archaeological perspective, this includes creation of web maps for environmental review. So these maps are in AGOL. They allow OSA staff to perform their review functions remotely and mostly without the need for ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. Additionally, we've transitioned from our Microsoft Access site form database That was a circa 2003 database, and we've transitioned to Laserfish. During that process, we imported all of our scanned PDF forms, and we migrated all of our old data from the old site form database. Part of that also set up a new process for recording forms, importing new forms, and other related site file information. All right. Now we're going to jump ahead to our goals. This is what we hope to do. And then I'll go into talking a little bit more about some of the steps that we're taking to achieve these. So what we aim to do. These are our goals kind of as they relate to remote access and data management. So we want to add survey reports to Laserfish. Right now, they're not in there, and we hope to import those and have them kind of sit alongside our site forms. Hopefully this will create a more kind of unified connection between the two, as they're pretty closely related. But more importantly, it's going to let folks kind of operate within the same application rather than going from one to another or back and forth. This is a big goal, and unfortunately, it has a bit of a deadline. We were told by our IT that we need to be off of Microsoft Access products by next October. We don't really know what that'll entail or all of the specifics about why, but has to do with discontinued support for the version we're using, I think. Additionally, we want to provide secure and remote access to GIS data for archaeological sites and surveyed areas to qualified individuals and agencies. We also want to be able to provide secure remote access for site files and reports in addition to GIS data. Now, we've laid the groundwork for some of these goals, as we'll talk about in a minute, but first we have to talk about our biggest challenge to making this happen, and that is the ability to charge for access, remote access. So as it stands, we lack the ability to charge, but so far we've had good support from folks in the department. Missing a slide. All right. So Rosie Blewett, a former assistant state archaeologist, last year at a SAA's, she presented about surveying other states and getting their take on how they deal with remote access as it relates to archaeological sites and the kind of E106 process or systems. And what she found was that many of the states have, most of the states now have remote access, and many of them charge for that access. Additionally, some of them still continue in-person access in addition to or alone. And they also provide other forms of access, such as performing the background research by internal staff for a cost or for free sometimes. And so what she found is that it varies across the state. But most states do have some way to charge for access, and that kind of further enhances their systems. Maybe in the future, next kind of surveys might include asking other states how much they pay to set up these systems and if their fees actually cover the costs to run them. But overall, it's been a great comparison to have lists of other states, what they charge if that information was given, and what kind of access that gets them. So fortunately, here in North Carolina, we have some things going in our favor, and that is the general statutes here that state the General Assembly has the power to authorize an agency to establish or increase a fee or charge for rendering any service or duty to the public. So it's only the General Assembly is allowed to do this, except in certain circumstances, such as the reasonable user fees for covering the cost of providing data processing services. So while we likely don't need General Assembly to pass a statute to allow us to charge, we do, however, have to go through an administrative code change. So, unfortunately, most of the ways that we're going to be able to provide secure remote access are based on the ability to provide additional software licensing and additional software licensing costs, just kind of general basic numbers. We found based on 70 firms that we have listed on our website as firms that do archaeology in the state, we estimated about $10,000 a year in additional costs to OSA to fund these licenses. So the ability for OSA to charge then requires going through this administrative code change to allow us to charge for access. So here's a little bit of that process. We're at the top.
At least we're on the chart.
We're on the chart. So, so prior to 2013, administrative code didn't have expiration dates, but then this GS 150B 21 was passed, and now agencies have to review their administrative code every 10 years to just make sure they are still necessary and are kind of within the agency's authority. So that said, we've been through some rounds of changes internally, but the procedure outlined here hasn't really begun until it gets submitted to the Office of Administrative Hearings. All right, so that was kind of like an explanation or an asterisk on our goals. But these are some of the things we're doing now to work towards achieving them. So like I already said, we are working on the administrative code process. And Chris and Dylan have been working on that. And it involves not just the change to allow OSA to charge for remote access, or it also includes other changes that kind of need to be made since the last time it was revised 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago. Let's see, we're also moving staff and kiosks off of ArcMap. Esri, the maker of ArcGIS Desktop and Pro and ArcMap and all the suite, they've announced the retirement of ArcMap in, I think, March of 2026. So we need to move off of ArcMap altogether, I think before 2027, when we renegotiate our statewide license with Esri. So the kiosk, this means that it might move to ArcPro. However, there's some hurdles to go through here. Some of those being that, again, licensing is an issue, mainly because of the way the kiosks are set up. We're also working on new tools and updates to existing tools. And this includes incorporating new data sets into these tools, as well as streamlining the tools from kind of basically 4 right now into 1. So converting the KML and dropping your shapefile. And if you've been to our office for in-person review, you've likely run into issues with our kiosks. And we're very aware of these issues. And we continue to work with DIT to try to resolve them. So far, DIT has been pretty responsive when we have an issue. And they seem to understand that the importance and to make it a priority. We understand the burden that in-person review is to consultants, most consultants. And we don't want to waste anyone's time. We want to be able to get people in and out as fast as possible. That said, we also want to make sure you get what you need. So when there are issues, we do our best to make accommodations to get you what you need, either after you've left or to reschedule. That's it. So anyways, thanks. And if you have questions, I think we're going to start Q&A, but you can also reach out to me or Dylan directly if you have any others.
Thank you, Sam. So yeah, the next 30-ish minutes, 25-ish minutes are for you guys to ask us anything. You don't even have to ask us a question. You can tell us a time, that you loved working with us. We'll take that too. So yeah, anything you got. Let's do in the white first, and then we'll go black. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much for the update on everything. In a super duper ideal, everything goes fine, there's no issues timeline. But what would tentatively be kind of your estimation to ensuring remote access both to the geodata and to the site forms and site files and everything that's important?
That's a great question, and I'll start, and then Chris will chime in as well. I would say initially, one of the steps that Sam was talking about is that administrative code change. So we're in the midst of that process now, and that, as Sam mentioned, that happens every 10 years. And so there is a window there so we've got 2 sides of the window there, or whatever, the metaphor. So we have a time frame for that to happen. So that will be going through that process this year. And that will be completed, I believe it has to be completed this year as well. It has to be completed by end of, or does it get completed within the next fiscal year?
The goal for the administrative code review and updates is, it's a rolling timeline for different departments and agencies. I think we're set to be done by December of this year. And that is, we can, as Sam Dillon said, it's a 10-year cycle that the administrative code is reviewed. And these are the codified rules of how the state, which federal statute interacts with like, individual consultants, things like that. These are the guidelines, rules, so that they're published and reviewed and vetted by independent, independent sections of the government to make sure that these are fair and appropriate. And within a 10-year cycle, we can make special requests and exemptions for that process as well. We're cautiously optimistic that we can get this done. I'm hoping we may be able to call an exception because this is such a need for us and for you guys as consultants. So that it will certainly save you guys time and money by not having to come physically and do background research. It will certainly save our staff time as well. So it's a huge efficiency improvement for us. So it's a real priority for us, and we're going to continue to push for that and get it as quickly as possible. I would hope, I don't want to I think our rules under promise and over deliver. I don't want to over promise, but I hope maybe by the end of this year, we should have, we might have something in place. I'd like to think we would have something beta ready for maybe a couple firms to test to see how it might work. There are other hurdles that we have other than the administrative code. Part of it is the tiered security access working within state IT provide outside service, whether we host it on our server or host it on some type of cloud service, hopefully that is secure and functional. So that's also going to be a consideration for the price point that we have to make it happen, which would in turn would fall under the general statute for what reasonable fees we could pass on to all of the users and what fees you all would be amenable to affording. There's a variation across the states. Some charge a huge amount, some charge a negligible amount. There's a lot of variation.
So what Chris is referring to, again, with the administrative code, that's the scary looking chart, the scary looking flow chart. That's what could be accomplished this year. And then for the whole process, then there are additional steps that, and some of those, as Sam and Chris just mentioned as well, are going to be overlapping and ongoing, and those things we're trying to get going, to be ready for once it's through the administrative code process. And there are at least two levels of legal review as well through our general counsel. One of those levels is part of the administrative code process that's baked into that. So that it will get through that. But then there'll be another legal review as well that has to do with contracts. So that may take some time too, and that's a little bit outside of our control to some extent. But, the general counsel's office has been moving efficiently of late. So we're optimistic cautiously about that. So meanwhile, what we can do is work to be developing and thinking about the infrastructure part on the back end and developing that. And then, as Chris mentioned, the further step beyond will then be working with IT to also work with potential vendors to think about, okay, what is the appropriate vendor that we can use to make the data most accessible for remote accessibility. And with any kind of government type of procurement, that involves at least 3 different vendors, and we work out an assessment process for that. And that can take some time as well. So that would be then looking beyond this year.
The simple answer, Bill, on that is, we want to have as much as you all do, but there are elements that, time elements, specifically multiple ones that are out of our control, that we're going to push into this as much as we can to try to get place. Because it helps us.
So Chris, within maybe like 5 years, is that what we're saying? It's our 5-year plan? It's y'all's 5-year plan?
Our 5-year plan is, I think this was, I think in 2017 was our 5-year plan.
All right, cool. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, fellas. All right, so we had a question back here first, and then we'll come to you, sir.
I was just curious, so I know the Superior Court has all this, but is this a access platform, something that governments or other people firms might be actually developed, or is it specifically for
So if it would be accessible to professionals with the level of qualifications necessary to access the data. And so that may include cultural resource management firms, it may include academic institutions, it could include other government agencies as well, perhaps other institutions that have qualified individuals or on their staff. It would be possible to apply for access to that system, if that makes sense.
All right. Next up. Yeah.
So, first I should say, I do appreciate all the efforts you guys are making moving forward, because obviously, I've been around since the old house, and remember, when the database was boxes of punch cards and a room full of beer. I obviously think it's almost like we're going to be spoiled, you guys were able to get what you achieved. But I do have questions about, and it's really 2 parts. First, it's related to big data management and digital applications. First is, with big data, is that we're talking about bringing in remote sensing applications, geophysical stuff, obviously things like, you may create large data clouds from LiDAR applications and laser scanning. You guys have a plan, an idea moving forward about how you may want to set or store that stuff. Collect this stuff like the idea, well, pixels and bytes are cheap, but storage is not zero. And
Right.
somebody has to store and maintain that. So you guys know how you want to set that someday?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's absolutely essential. We would have to evaluate that for sure. I mean, certainly we're thinking about that. But then, that has to be part of the assessment process with, the different potential vendors that we would have to go through to make it happen. Because,
How do you explain other people accessing that? I mean, like, if we did a big, laser scanning of a structure, a mountain site, say a mountain site, right? And we've got all this digital data, how do we give it to you in a way that
Oh,
you
right.
can archive?
right?
You know, that's still a large amount of data. You know, and right now, I mean, you might provide that in the report as, oh, we've done this, and this is part of the communication. At some point, right now, it's just sitting with us. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is something we've thought about, and we definitely recognize the importance and value to be a repository for that kind of data going forward. As more of that gets generated, and then as people kind of go back and do revisits and more work on top of that, it'd be great for them to be able to access kind of the original raw data without having to track down consultants or firms that are maybe no longer operating. So yeah, that is an important thing we have spent time thinking about. Right now, we don't have a solution other than just to kind of accept it as we can or when we can, and kind of deal with some of the consequences or grumblings from our IT department about how much space we're taking up, or maybe we have to put it on kind of external drives for a little while until we can have a more secure long-term space for that kind of stuff.
Because I was thinking about not only the geophysical, like the remote sensor data, which is massive, and obviously the Christians are like the side sonar. So
We would absolutely love to have all of the, from the maritime standpoint, for what's in all data,
yeah,
if we want that, but yeah, you and I both know that's a huge amount of data.
Mhm.
And that's something that our new secretary is very much about integration and advantage of these skill sets within the divisions of our department. So this is probably, and I'll like it, I think it's going to be forward with having their conversation with the archives as a part of our department in terms of develop how they could and would develop more digital archive and digital archive storage, because everything's moving in that direction, in addition to the paper file, and that could be something that the state archives and local resources could collaborate on, move forward on, together with GATU to figure out a solution and cost sharing on that could accommodate terabytes of data that we would be looking at with from the type of scanning technology that goes with
and my other side actually came with wonderful. I love the idea of story maps and things like that. And Sam, you know where I'm headed with this. That sometimes, as part of our creative engagement, we might come up with a couple of things in a digital app. And then, I don't know how we can come to a way that give it to you, use it.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing when we were talking about.
So when it
Those
comes to the
mitigation.
story maps, I can kind of answer that a little bit, because the way that we've had you guys build them now, we encountered problems with the review process when they were built outside of our GIS account umbrella. So what we are doing is we are having the consultants or whoever is building the map. You do not have to be SOA qualified in anything to build these maps for us. They just have to tell the story they're supposed to tell. So sometimes an applicant will have someone from their own business or agency or whatever do this. I believe we have some of the folks from Fort Bragg who are going to be doing their own. They're not going to get a consultant to do that. And so the one that I posted earlier, that was done by one of the American Rivers staff. So what we do is we give you access, we give you an account login, and you can log in, you can go in, you can create all of the content, you can build all the story map, you can build all the background maps, you can do all that stuff, and then it lives with us forever. What we make sure that we do, though, is in case something were to happen, we have a PDF kind of printed copy just so we know kind of how it looked. Those PDFs are terrible. But we also make sure that we have you submit to us all of the photograph, every image that you used, your copy, so like a Word document with the copy in it, any maps, anything like that, there's a spreadsheet where you tell us where you got it from, did you get permission, did you need permission, all that kind of good stuff. So we keep a backup of all of that so we can recreate these maps if we ever need to, these deliverables. And we have also seen that we can also recreate other maps built outside of us. So if you have a story map that you have built in ArcGIS online in their story map platform, you can very easily tell it to be like shareable and able to be duplicated. And then we can just duplicate it and create a version over underneath our umbrella. And then, we would try to make sure we got all that background data saved somewhere. But that's kind of how we're looking at doing it now. It's become the process that may change a little bit, but we have found that that is the easiest and best way to make sure that the review process goes smoothly, and then also all of that data. Again, people have concerns, our staff has concerns about the longevity of those and what happens if something goes down, and do we have a backup for that? So we try to make sure that we do have that backup. But yeah, we could talk about moving things over again. It's very, very easy. Sam and Andy both have permissions that allow us to really maneuver very well within the space in there. Thanks for the question.
I think that broad issue that you bring up there, Shane, is like it is the digital humanities version of the curatorial crisis, right? It's imperative, it's not optional, and the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, is going to have to contend with it. And I think we're going to have to be really strategic about our solutions. That's another reason why the time, we're going to have to build out enough time to
Super, super happy with all the progress you made, and not envious of the problem you've got.
yeah, it is but yeah, thank you for highlighting it and flagging it. Don.
All right, so I think.
Underneath your vision, you have 7 days to review a project. That does not include you requiring surveyors or other steps. It's just you have to do it in 7 days. Is that correct?
We have to respond within 7 days if that's what they say. So we recently got an EO submission that said we had 30 days to review. It was from the Corps of Engineers. It was for a much larger project. And so we had a regular 30-day review period. The 7-day review period, when they tell us that, we can tell them we need additional information, that we need to see an official evaluation. We can tell them that we know there's an adverse effect. They are going to need to do mitigation and all of that. They can then turn around and tell us, well, that doesn't fit into our project timeline, which may be a very expedited, truncated timeline that they've decided on. And they will say, we heard what you said, and we don't have time to do that. We're not going to do that. And right now, we can respond to that. But it is very hard to make them, the federal agency, do anything.
But if there is no already reported significant resource, and in other situations you would require a archaeological survey, can you still do that? And if so, can they then come back and say, well, we don't have time to wait
Correct.
that work?
Yes. Yes. And again, we can object to that, and we can send it up the chain. But whether or not, at the moment, that can get resolved in a way that's satisfactory to the historic preservation community, is not entirely likely. But
If you're not included in the primary work
correct.
as it was in other circumstances.
Correct. We are treating these reviews like any other review, any other day. We just have to get them done faster.
Yeah, we heard from other SHPOs, and they basically said, okay, we're just going to file all that, and that's hypothetically what we would have done, and they just move on with the project. Luckily, it hasn't quite happened here yet.
No,
but
we've been lucky, I think.
Yeah, I was just just to qualify that, but I was gonna say that so far, I think what we've been seeing, and Lund, tell me if you agree, we've been seeing the federal agencies that have presented a project under the EO, they've defined it narrowly and pretty specifically, and it hasn't been a large number of projects so far. But again, we'll see how that evolves. But I think, with the exception of one federal agency that I've seen, the other ones that have submitted projects under the EO 14156 have defined it very narrowly, and the scope has been
they've been pretty compliant overall. And I think what has helped is that because we are forced to respond in 7 days, and they're more willing to kind of do the compliance is required, knowing that once that is submitted, we only have 7 days to do it. But the fact of the matter is that with the scope and scale of EO, and as Kay was mentioning earlier, that includes transportation projects, and those are massive, and transmission lines. And we're starting to see, even from USDA, kind of willy-nilly saying everything is a part of this EO, from like putting in like a private electric line to one house. And we're like, that's okay. It's not going to be a problem, but you can't just keep doing this for all these projects. So we're keeping an eye out. But luckily, the federal agencies that operate here in North Carolina have been a lot more compliant compared to stuff like Michigan and Wisconsin, which has basically been ignoring their SHPOs entirely.
Yeah, and out west, yeah.
I was going to say, in the agencies that we have a programmatic agreement with, again, as Katie mentioned or explained earlier, if those programmatic agreements have emergency action steps within the programmatic agreement, they have been very good about falling back on that expedited process in the programmatic agreement for projects that would fall into that category or be identified as that category. The timeline would be compressed further. The review would be expedited, but the case I'm thinking of is with the Tennessee Valley Authority, and we have an active PA with them, and so many of the projects that would qualify for expedited review, they would also be sort of handled internally with their cultural heritage staff, and then we would be getting a post-emergency action notification, and then responding accordingly. So there would be like a sort of post-action activity assessment or mitigation, depending. But so yeah, it's been mostly the review window.
And we have had some agencies reach out to us and request that we consider, drafting programmatic agreements that will help them through this process. We do have folks who work for these federal agencies who don't necessarily like what they're having to do, right? They want to do it the right way, and they want to make sure that in case certain things go backward, they are doing enough, even within this limited lane that they're being forced into, to be able to kind of reel it back later and say, all right, well, we did these extra steps though, and so we were doing the things we were supposed to be doing, and so they can keep on moving through the process later. But that's something that Renee and the entire team at OSA are going to continue to work on with all of our agency partners, just because it's a big moving thing. It's got lots of mechanisms, and we don't really know what's going to happen in the long term. So we'll keep y'all posted on what's going on much as we can. I think we might have time for maybe one more quick fire question if anybody's got something. All right.
Your question was, have we thought about tools for inputting data?
Yeah.
So as that relates, are you thinking about specifically archaeology or ER? I mean, typically we receive shape files with report submissions. So we get, or even maybe before that, to Wesley as he site numbers. As far as any sort of new process for drawing or adding in your own sites, it might be that kind of within the current tool we have kind of that ability to buffer and select your sites within your 2 miles of your APE. It might be something similar to that, but not necessarily something that you would need to submit if we're talking about a remote version of GIS. Did that answer your question?
All right, very cool. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Those are great questions. We got Renee coming up to send us off. Let you guys be free and wild. Make sure that's turned on, please.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Is it working? Okay, first I want to thank each and every one of you for coming and listening and asking questions and going back and taking the advice that was given to you and asking more questions as you need to. We really do appreciate this, and we apologize that it's been so long, but you can see some of the pressures that we've been under with changes in staff and with changes in administrations. I want to thank our staff for the great job that they did of archaeology and environmental review, and thank you folks from survey and planning coming down and participating with us as well, and Christy over there and local governments. I want to repeat a little bit of what you heard last. And I know I'm repeating what I said earlier, but we are in the cultural resources, historic resources realm very, very much at risk. We're at risk for one, overload. Imagine that we're going to be needing to hire new people. We're going to be needing to respond to emergency declarations. And at the same time, our federal partners who are trying to do the very best that they can with their rules are dealing with massive cuts and layoffs, as you know. The Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, in a conversation 2 weeks ago, said that they are expecting that their staff will be cut so that they will have 4 people reviewing projects from all over the United States and the territories. So again, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going once again to say, please sit down at your computers, at your phones, and be in touch with the people who can make a difference. They need to be able to have a backbone that they understand what that backbone is, okay? And part of that is our shared history and culture. And thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it. Look for the follow-ups that are going to come to you. And Katie and Kim, best of all, y'all going over to DOT, and dang you, DOT, for taking them.